The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
Now then, you're very welcome back. We're going to go through the Sunday Papers. Very happy to say live in studio. Conor McKeon is with us of the Irish Independent, covers GAA, and Clíodhna O'Connor as well. Clíodhna, an All-Ireland winning goalkeeper with Dublin, All-Star, and now making her way in the world of coaching. You're both very welcome. Thanks for coming in. I'll give you the back pages first of all. And so, like a dearth of Premier League, as you can imagine, given the circumstances, Rory McIlroy there on the back page of the Mail on Sunday. Moving day for McIlroy. This is at Wentworth, where both McIlroy and Shane Lowry are right in contention. They're just starting their final rounds now. We have Sun Sport. It's a picture of Marcus Rashford and Eric Ten Hag with his arm around him. You're the Ron that we want. And so Eric Ten Hag has set Marcus Rashford a target of 20 goals this season. And it's claimed, writes Richard Moriarty, that Manchester United's players think the team better off with Rashford playing up front as opposed to Cristiano Ronaldo. The sidebar, by the way, on the Sun, Lineker and quite a few others accusing football of missing a chance to celebrate the Queen, but also John Egan, it seems, could make a move to West Ham in January. So West Ham looking at paying £12 million sterling for 29-year-old John Egan. They were trying to get him in the summer and they're going back for more in January. The Mirror then, United front. Again, this is football and its return to action. Football prepares to resume Tuesday with tributes planned and supporters expected to act with respect, is the headline, back page of the Mirror. Picture again of Rory McIlroy here, this time on the Sunday Times. Rory on the charge. So he was brilliant yesterday. He kind of played himself back into contention with a brilliant, I was going to say third round, but of course second round. It's a 54-hole event at Wentworth, given the events of the week. So McIlroy won off the lead at PGA Championship. And then alongside that, the main story on the Sunday Times front page, Chelsea PSG sporting director to help Potter. So Chelsea are interested in hiring Luis Campos. He's 58 years of age. He's at PSG. He's Portuguese, and he's quoted as being a world-acclaimed football expert. And in fairness, his reputation is pretty impressive. He built his reputation at Monaco and Lille, who twice put together sides that stopped PSG winning the Ligue 1 title. So what do PSG do? Swoop in and buy him. That's how the world works in football. And then we have another back page for you, this time Sunday World. Pool need to Klopp on. And this is Jurgen Klopp facing what the Sunday World describe as a crisis. Also in this piece, Kevin Palmer says there are suggestions Liverpool's players are bemused by the decision of Klopp's assistant Pep Linders to publish a book revealing the inner secrets of the dressing room. I didn't read that book. I don't know to what extent secrets are revealed. I would have thought it would be anodyne enough. I saw Didi Hamann was making similar points during the week. I haven't seen any great revelations in that Pep Linders book. And then the piece also says all eyes will be on Anfield Tuesday as Liverpool supporters will be asked to take part in a tribute to Queen Elizabeth, with Reds fans booing the UK's national anthem on their recent visits to Wembley. Sunday Independent finally then. Brilliant picture of Rory McIlroy, blue skies above him as he's teeing off. McIlroy makes a move, fired up Rory chasing Euro Tour glory, and then beneath that, supporters group urges refunds for fans. So given the cancellations of the weekend, supporters group saying some kind of refund for fans would be good. I'm not too sure what's happening next weekend on the Premier League front. Just turning inside to the Mail on Sunday briefly, page 93. There is now a worry that next weekend is under threat, not so much as a cancellation out of respect, but just the logistics of Operation London Bridge and all the policing that will be required for the Queen's funeral on the Monday morning, Monday the 19th. So what that means for Premier League games, especially in London, over the weekend is in question. Millwall, who obviously are in that neck of the woods, they're playing Blackpool on Saturday, and they've said that game is absolutely going ahead. In London, Spurs take on Leicester 5:30. Sunday has quite a few London fixtures. Brentford play Arsenal at 2. Chelsea-Liverpool is at Stamford Bridge 4:30 on Sunday. There are two other games on the Sunday, Man United Leeds and Everton-West Ham. The Everton game is in Liverpool, so as to what extent they can go ahead in light of logistics, I don't know, but they hadn't really banked on missing 2 rounds in the Premier League, that's for sure. Already a very condensed calendar.
Yeah, well, they're under pressure, and you know, the whole thing about the Premier League fixtures this weekend became a bit of a cause celeb for people who kind of want to put it down as maybe a bit of a culture war between these the different sports, particularly when the other sports in England did go ahead. But I think the Premier League would have left themselves up there to be shot at had they gone ahead. Particularly was the Queen was a patron, I think, of the FA. So I think if those games had gone ahead, because of the media coverage that they garner, and I suppose this overriding feeling that the whole of Britain should be in mourning at the moment, I think the Premier League found itself in a pretty difficult position of making that decision whether to plough ahead or whether to go to the wall. And I think, like most people, I expected those games to be cancelled once it happened.
So did I, but I just thought everything would be cancelled, whereas the golf at Wentworth continued, Premiership Rugby continued, cricket continued, horse racing is on today. And it was interesting, in 1952 I was reading, when King George VI died, it was the opposite. Football continued and the more establishment sports stopped, and it was the same in 36 when King George V died. But there's been a role reversal here where those more establishment sports have continued, football has stopped. Apparently I was reading, Clíodhna, there was just a 20-minute meeting on Friday, and as was kind of mentioned there, because the Queen's a patron of the FA, they said, well, that's us done, that's the decision made. So there we are.
Well, maybe that was the bit that sort of forced them into the decision. But I would have thought as well it was all or nothing, at least for one weekend. I do get the piece around London about the policing and like large scale events. I understand that, but definitely one weekend you would think if it's the whole of society should be in mourning, well then it's the whole of society. It should be a blanket thing. But I don't know. But maybe the FA did the right thing. You know, maybe she is their or was their patron. So
yeah.
Fair enough.
I think, like a lot of people, my understanding of what was going to happen was informed by that epic piece in The Guardian that a lot of people read from about 5 years ago. Yeah. London Bridge is down, and the protocol for when the Queen died, and brilliantly detailed and compelling though it is, I'm not sure it necessarily played out like that, because, you know, it painted this picture of, you know, the moment that it is announced and all the screens in the world go blank and people stop in the street and farmers put down their sights and everybody. But I think quickly what you came to realise is that, you know, okay, maybe the BBC One and BBC Two merged, but people have 950 channels now, you know, and as a global event, like today is September the 11th, for instance, right? So when that happened in 2001, I think we were all a little bit more, everything was a little bit smaller, and I think things did genuinely grind to a halt. Whereas, if anything, I don't think we kind of really hold those leaders in as high esteem as we used to. Maybe that's a generic thing to say, but like between royalty and presidents and popes, I don't think this is quite the seismic event that a lot of people were expecting it to be. And that's in evidence by the fact that across Britain there are lots of sports being played today. But the other element to that when it comes to the Premier League, and somebody else made this point, I'm ripping it off, I just can't remember who said it. Rugby and cricket will not be criticised for going ahead by maybe some of the more right-wing media in Britain, whereas I think football was leaving itself open, the Premier League was leaving itself open to that kind of criticism and market disrespect if they didn't cancel it.
I did read that as well. Maybe there's something in that. They're used to being criticised and didn't want to take the chance. So let's jump in then. Sunday papers. I have it in front of me, and I guess it's amongst the front page coverage as well. You're seeing Rory McIlroy across the board. Really, in the absence of Premier League, it was one of the few bits of live sport on yesterday, and you both looked at the LIV golf coverage. I suppose there's a Patrick Reed interview in the Sunday Times which jumps off the page, and then Paul Kimmage is over at Wentworth, and he's just been trying to, I don't know what, feel just how real the beef is between the LIV golfers and the establishment golfers. So he's writing about that in the Sunday Independent. Conor, I know you're a big golf fan. Clíodhna, is this a sport you've been following over the last 18 months and this LIV controversy?
You kind of have no option, really, isn't it? It's now made golf a little bit more interesting or topical for people like me who would be aware of who wins major tournaments, that I wouldn't sit down to watch a whole tournament, you know, basically just listen to my dad and he tells me what happens. But it's brought it to a whole different level of dramatics, which maybe some people in sport like it, and let's stoke it a little bit. And if there's other documentaries and things going to happen in the future, maybe this is all part of changing the image of golf, making it a bit more dramatic.
Yeah.
So Patrick Reed is on page 3 of the Sunday Times. Apparently there's a 2-hour interview with Tom Kershaw. It's not a big piece, but certainly he's come out fighting, and he's livid with the way he's been portrayed by the media. He's livid with the way other players have talked about him, including Rory McIlroy. I feel like Rory making those types of comments is insulting, is what he says of McIlroy's conduct over the last couple of months. The headline is, "The malice and deceit to say that about me is just ridiculous." Now, he could be talking about any number of things, be it his family or the cheating allegations or the stealing allegations. He kicks it off by remembering his 4-year-old daughter coming home from school, very upset because she's been bullied because of his reputation. "Nobody likes your daddy. Your daddy's a bad person." He said it felt like someone had stuck a knife through his heart, the piece. Do you know how hard that hits you as a father? Reed asks, his voice rising in anger despite the episode being 4 years ago. "She was getting bullied because of me, all because of what's written in a piece or in a paper. It's fake and it's fictitious and it's wrong. I can handle a lot of things, but that's the lowest blow you can get." And he says of the PGA Tour, the narrative is he's a horrendous person, he's a cheater, a liar and a thief. "Now I'm a murderer," that's in reference to the LIV Golf Saudi venture. "Now I'm a murderer and everything else on earth, and that's not okay because it's not who I am." And so this is his first interview since he signed with LIV Golf.
Well, one of the more revealing parts of the interview is this paragraph. Tom Kershaw did the interview, and he says, "Reed believes the narrative against him was concocted insidiously 8 years ago after he proclaimed himself one of the top 5 players in the world, after claiming his 3rd PGA Tour title at 23 years old." And there's a quote from Reed, "It rubbed some people and players the wrong way, I guess. Me making comments like that basically gave them a reason to be basically like, this is our black hat. This is a guy to put down as a villain, and he's our target," which to me shows a remarkable lack of self-awareness from Patrick Reed, because you know, I don't even remember that being a particular issue. You know,
I remember it at the time. I remember he won, and he was asked, you know, because your 3rd victory and you're so young, amazing. And in his interview, like this is on the green when he's just won, he said something like, "Yeah, look, I think I've unbelievable talent, and I sort of see it like it's me and it's Tiger and 1 or 2 others. You know, I feel like a top 5 player in the world." And at the time, I mean, his memory's playing tricks on him. I distinctly remember the commentary team almost lauding his sense of confidence and, wow, look at this guy and his inner belief. It's amazing. So I don't think that's the moment you can pinpoint the golfing world turning their back on Reed.
No, like a lot of people, my sort of impressions of Patrick Reed were formed by the chapter in Shane Ryan's book, Slaying the Tiger, and it was an awful lot of it was about his upbringing and about his college golfing career, which, good and all as it was mired in controversy as well, specifically around the question of cheating. Now, that's something that Patrick Reed addresses here.
And stealing.
And stealing, yeah. And
again, he denies that.
And again, like, stealing is one thing, but in the sport of golf, like that's so enthralled to its own rule book, like, cheating is literally the worst thing that you can do. Like, it's you know, the end of the world. And the fact that when he was last caught cheating at the Hero World Challenge, like, such a tournament to be looking for an advantage in a bunker from, like, you know, this is like a pre-season friendly and trying to cheat, even though there's world ranking points and, you know, money obviously at play. But he's also suing Brandon Chambly, who a lot of people who watch golf would know as possibly the best analyst in golf, for $620 million, which is as bizarre as it sounds. And there's the issue with his parents as well, and you know, nobody knows what goes on in other people's families, and that's fair enough, but you're probably not going to get too many admirers. If the subject that you're speaking about is your popularity, which Patrick Reed is here, well, having a restraining order against your own parents isn't going to really boost your popularity, I think, amongst most people in the community.
Well, it was really memorable when he won the Masters a couple of years ago, and like, he's a hometown kid winning, so there should have been like scenes of ecstasy on the 18th, and it was a very lukewarm round of applause, and there were golf feature writers a few miles down the road at his parents' house as they watched on television, documenting like the heartbroken parents watching their estranged son win. He does address this situation in this piece, and he never talks about his family really, and what he says is, the things I had to encounter growing up as a kid, it's not something that there's really a time or place to talk about. At the end of the day, it's horrendous. To sit there and try and tarnish a major victory like that shows the abuse of power the media had right then and there. They make up stories and say, oh look, he's even turned his back on his family, and that's not true at all, because they know I'm not going to talk publicly about it, and it allows them to stir anything they want, and that's not okay. So that's as close as he's come to addressing the family situation. I don't know what's going on there, clearly. So there's the estrangement, there's the cheating allegations, the stealing allegations, the sense of a personality that's a little bit brash and not very self-aware, not very likeable.
Not particularly popular with other golfers as well, which takes some doing, you know. It's
Well, it was put to him that there was that famous ESPN survey. They do this in golf. It's actually brilliant. We should do this in all sports, where they anonymously survey the golfers and ask them questions like, which fellow pro would you be least likely to help in a fight? I mean, we need a GEA version of this if you want to do that, Conor, anytime soon. And he finished second last after Bubba Watson. So of all the players, if they saw, you know, being assaulted in the car park, he was second bottom on that list. Although he says, I've never had any negativity from any of my fellow golfers, which again, that kind of sums up Reid in a way. He's sort of saying, oh no, look, I've never encountered this kind of negativity. But like literally at the Ryder Cup, Jordan Spieth stopped wanting to play with him. And then Reid went and publicly called out Jordan Spieth in the press conference. I was there for not wanting to play with him, and made this situation incredibly awkward as Jordan Spieth kind of looked at the ground and said, oh, I'm not being drawn on that. So like there is a kind of lack of self-awareness about Reid as much as anything.
Yeah, I mean, he clearly has baggage, you know, and he's anything, whatever's going on with his family. I mean, we've no sense of what that is, but he's describing it as horrendous and something he's not willing to talk about. When he was younger, an adolescent or whatever. But then, so you go to college then, and you're obviously a good golfer, and the accusations of cheating and all this sort of stuff. So you would imagine that this narrative of the world is against me kind of suits him, because that's a way of, no, none of that ever happened, and yet trouble seems to be around me, but it's everyone else's fault, it's not my fault. So I'd say the more he promotes the everyone's out to get me and I'm the villain of golf, suits him maybe, and allows him to deflect from some of potential cheating or stealing allegations or rule breaking on his behalf in the world of golf.
But what's remarkable about it for me is that Patrick Reid, whatever way he wants to dress this up, has always been seen as a bit of like an anti-hero in golf. One of the lesser, you know, as you said, when he was in the final round of the Masters in 2018, you know, he's from Georgia, like he's from down the road from Augusta, and he was in the final group with Rory McIlroy, and the roars for the two of them on the first tee would tell you everything you need to know about the popularity there. But what's remarkable, and what might lead on to another piece here, is that despite the fact and you know, all the issues of that feed into his lack of popularity are addressed in the interview, despite all of those, he still didn't come in for nearly the same flack about the LIV Tour as Graeme McDowell, because Graeme McDowell opened his mouth and spoke a little bit too much and spoke a little bit unwisely about it, which is probably the most interesting part of Paul Kimmage's piece today from Wentworth, when he says, like, Paul is in Wentworth and he was keeping an eye on the dynamic that's at play, because this season that has featured the civil war in golf has been leading up to this moment in a lot of ways, when some of the LIV players and the PGA players were actually going to be on the same course at the same time, outside of a major. And there's already been a lot said. Players like even Shane Lowry, who would be, you know, like he would, as he says himself, he shies away from not controversy, but confrontation. He was very vocal about this on Wednesday and about his relationships with the players. But what's interesting in this part is when Paul speaks to Graeme McDowell, he kind of accepts himself that his biggest sin in all of this was actually trying to explain his position, you know. Because anybody you've ever met that comes across Graeme McDowell will tell you that he's a very likeable person when you meet him in the flesh. But for about 3 or 4 weeks at the start of this LIV Golf Tour, he became a bit of a punching bag for some of the sillier things that he was saying in public. Very ill-advised comments given the subject matter that was being at play and the seriousness of the topic, you know, such as it was in the grand debate. But no, it's interesting that he seems to have, the penny seems to have dropped there. Like, I haven't heard a whole pile from Graeme McDowell since those initial comments, whenever they were 5 or 6 weeks ago. So he seems to have figured that out.
Well, I think McDowell's probably had 20 years of continual good press coverage. And I suspect around the time of the LIV launch, he felt very confident in front of media and had a history of charming media and thought, well, I can talk these guys around. And suddenly he's talking about Khashoggi and, you know, various aspects of the Saudi regime. And 2 minutes later, he's still talking about those things, and he's just digging deeper and deeper, and it's a mess. And that's day one of several where he just keeps on talking to the media, and he seems to have realised that you can't reconcile being a role model and everybody saying what a great guy you are and taking the LIV Golf money when you're very aware of the sports washing intentions. The Paul Kimmage piece, it chronicles various quotes which have been out there all week from McIlroy and from Lowry and various things they've said over the last while. I guess where it is very striking and interesting is when he clocks McDowell Tuesday lunchtime. He exits the players' lounge and sees Rory for the first time chatting with Jay Monahan from the PGA Tour. There was a time not so long ago when he'd strutted across to join them, but his embarrassment is palpable as he almost slinks by. And then it talks about Wednesday, the eve of the Pro-Am, and McDowell is practicing his chipping and putting, and he says, Paul Kimmage writes that one of the amateurs runs across to shake his hand. It leaves a mark on him. He goes back to his work chipping and putting for 30 minutes around the green until he can't avoid me, writes Paul Kimmage. Hello, Graham. Hello, PK. How are you doing, I ask. He laughs. I feel like Lance Armstrong when you were chasing him. We chat for a moment. He tells some golf writers a day later that he would not change his decision. His only regret about the last 3 months is that he talked too much. Paul Kimmage says, I wanted to send you a text. Shut the F up. You should have, he says. We walk back towards the clubhouse. I ask him his first round tee time. It's 7:50, right? Yeah, I'll see you in the morning. He seems surprised. Are you coming out? I remember what you were, I smile. What I am, he says. So that's McDowell not quite giving up his sense of self or his golfing aspirations.
An interesting element.
It's quite sad, really.
It is, but an interesting element to all of this is that Netflix are making a documentary about this year in the PGA Tour, and when that was announced last year or early this year, like a lot of people, I was trying to figure out, when I saw the list of golfers that were participating that would be mic'd up on the fairways, I was trying to figure out, like, what's going to be interesting about this? Like, because if you take your average, you know, top 10 American, particularly a lot of the Americans, they come across as being very bland. A lot of them were kind of college jock golfers. Their life experience mightn't be, you know, there's very few Sevies in there, for instance. I'm not sure what kind of documentary it would have been without Civil War breaking out. But now that it did, it will be a far better documentary, because it's the biggest thing that has happened to golf in a long time. And you know, it's very easy for us, the general public, to side on the part of righteousness on the PGA Tour over LIV Golf. But, you know, you only had to watch golf regularly over the last few years to get the sense that the PGA Tour is a very sort of manicured and cosseted organisation, you know. And, you know, the interviews with the tournament sponsors, and it never really felt like it was always enthralled to itself, you know. It always had that feeling as well. And obviously the threat that's coming at them is one that it's very hard to get around, you know, an organisation that just wants to throw money endlessly at it. But it has, like, it has changed what it's trying to do. It does seem to have accepted, like, it has found all this extra money, you know, in the form of PIP payments to the players who basically move the needle, to use the American sort of colloquialism. So, like, in some ways, it has been a good thing.
Oh, Phil Mickelson's doing a lap of honour media tour now, going, see? See? I told you they'd money.
And for people who would be interested in watching that documentary, and I think it'll be a huge thing when it does come out, because, and this might lead on to a piece that Joe Brawley has written today about the Magic Johnson documentary, They Call Me Magic. A lot of these big streaming companies are investing in sports documentaries, and have done increasingly since maybe ESPN started with the 30 for 30 season. But between The Last Dance and Drive to Survive on Netflix on Formula One, they've been hugely, hugely successful. And they do whatever about the money that the PGA Tour or Formula One have made from Netflix or from the streaming service. I think the exposure that they give them, the insight that you get, because you'll always be more connected with a sport when you have some sense of the participant. Like, this is very anecdotal, but I was away on holidays recently with my wife, and we watched All or Nothing, the Amazon documentary on Arsenal, and I got a text from her a couple of weeks later on the Friday saying, have Arsenal signed anyone yet on deadline day? And I've two younger sisters who recently told me that they were going to the Hungarian Grand Prix with a few of their friends, and we wouldn't have came from much of a motor sporting household, but that is the effect that those kind of documentaries have. And it's the same with the Magic Johnson documentary. I read Joe's piece last night and actually flicked on the first episode of it, and it is brilliant. But what struck me straight away was that, despite the fact that, you know, Magic Johnson was practically retired by the time I interest in, or would have had any awareness of him as an athlete, I sort of already knew his story, because the NBA, ever since the era of Magic Johnson leading into Michael Jordan, has sold itself really, really well that way, like through the 30 for 30 docs and the Last Waltz, or the Last Waltz, the Jordan one. Last Dance. I'd have a far better understanding of the Detroit Pistons, Chicago Bulls rivalry than I would of any of the GAA rivalries that I sort of like to investigate and write about. And that's a huge thing for those sports. So to get back to the LIV PGA thing, I think it will actually be a huge thing for golf when it comes out, because, golf as a global sport that people kind of watch, people come in and out of it in majors, but I think if you do have a proper documentary where you get to see the human side and the dynamics of the players that play, away from the manicured press conferences and the very puffy PR stuff, I think it becomes far more compelling.
Well, that's the piece, isn't it, that you get? It's the personal side. So take Drive to Survive. So anyone who is interested in Formula One, you're sitting at your telly watching the cars go around the track. Unless you're really interested in Formula One as a sport or the technical, tactical piece of it, you can't even really see who's in the cars. So now I've watched Drive to Survive, I know the personalities. I'm still not that interested in Formula One as a sport, but I'm interested in the person and the personalities and what's going on. I still can't tell you anything very technical about motorsport, but I can name drivers, and I have a better sense of the occasions and it as entertainment rather than another sport I'd watch for the sport itself rather than the personality. So I think the exact same thing could happen to golf. The exact same thing. Because it's so long a tournament, It's not like you watch it in 60 minutes.
Yeah, it lends itself perfectly to this kind of documentary as well. I love the sport and got to know the characters after, and like that enriches your understanding of what you're watching, because they have so much time where they're walking down fairways together, and if you know the personalities and you're watching body language, like imagine after, say Patrick Reed was in this Netflix documentary, and like we've just listed off pretty interesting things about him, and he's just had a pot shot there at McIlroy who said is insulting, and now imagine next Sunday they're playing together in a major in the final round.
Yeah,
like you're all in, like
you're drawn, yeah.
Half the reason we all like sport is it's just a soap opera.
Yeah,
it's the personalities, it's the interactions, and golf could make hay if it builds up 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 big characters.
A lot of sporting organisations, and some of them would be fairly close to home, seem to fail to appreciate what that kind of coverage, like regardless of whether it's a big Netflix documentary or maybe it's just better, sort of a better environment between people who tell stories and the participants itself. A lot of sporting organisations don't really grasp that. They don't really have any great measure of the value of that. There are some of the greatest, most interesting athletes I've ever come across are GAA players in this country the last 20 years, with really interesting backgrounds that the public would never fully appreciate, because the environment isn't really there for them to kind of give that side of the story.
My sense is they are all very private people. I really find with GAA players,
I do think that's the culture there. Like, I've spoken to enough GAA players over the years that would tell you that they would have no problem kind of speaking more and telling more stories if everyone else did. But I think it's nearly the culture that is there is that you don't at all. And I only think it's a shame from the point of view that, some of the best teams we'll ever see in Gaelic games have kind of come and gone, and all we know them as is the results on the pitch. Like say a team like the Mayo footballers of the last decade, people will say it'd be very unfair if they're only to be judged by their ultimate failure to win an All-Ireland. But it's like, well, what else do you have? You know what I mean? And I think like that's not a criticism of any individuals or teams or players, and people should be compelled to contribute to documentaries or feature articles or any of those sort of things. But it's just that it has gone to the point of stalemate now in all of this, and it would take sort of great vision to change how that dynamic works.
Well, Clíodhna, you've been involved in like male inter-county coaching ticket, so you'd have a sense of the culture.
Well, I think there's two things at play. There's one, because GAA is such a small ecosystem, that there's definitely a sense of don't say anything because everybody's so close and we're not giving anything away and everything has to be kept private. And where in reality, what you're doing in one camp, the people down the road are probably doing the exact same thing. We're all doing relatively the same thing, but the sense of don't give anything away, because you're playing against people in college, you might play with them club, everything. So everyone's very connected. So that's one piece. And I think the other piece is, and Colin O'Rourke writes about All-Stars today and David Clifford, but he lists all the things that are more important than an All-Star. The team, even down to a club challenge match is nearly more important than an All-Star. So there's definitely a culture where we don't like the people who stick their head out or do something a little bit different. You have to be ultimately loyal to your team, and that is more important. And don't get too big for your boots, and don't say anything you shouldn't say, and you don't give too much of your individuality, because you are part of this unit and this team. And I think that is culturally a big thing in the GAA.
And to be fair, like, it's interesting when we're talking about Drive to Survive and now golf, they are individual sports. You're not letting down anybody. Like Patrick Reed coming out saying, and another thing, McIlroy insulting. He doesn't have to go back to a locker room who are playing McIlroy's team tomorrow and explain himself.
But that's it. I remember talking to somebody about this a while ago who was still playing at the time, and they said that, well, actually, where the pressure comes on, not to, to disclose things, is from everyone else, because it is a collective thing. But equally, I was talking to somebody who was part of a very successful GAA team recently, and it was around the time that the Last Dance came out. And he said that when you're in it at the time, you're so obsessed with becoming better and that journey and being the best and winning. But it's only when you see documentaries like that you think, well, actually, your legacy is always enhanced a bit more if those stories are told. Like the Kilkenny team, Brian Cody's Kilkenny team, will go down as the greatest hurling team of all time, and Limerick are going to get close to that themselves. But like, if you ask me to sort of think of a hurling team off the top of my head the last 30 years, I go back to Loughnane and Dalo and Davy Fitz, because you had a sense of their personality. You were more invested in that team, despite the fact that you're not from Clare, because you seemed to think that you knew them. Now, that's a massive kind of shift. That's just the way that it went organically. But I'm just saying, I think it's like, even watching that All or Nothing documentary, it's far easier to like Arsenal and Mikel Arteta when you actually saw the human side of what he was doing. When he was in the canteen, slumped over after they lost their 5th game in a row. Like, outside it, you just kind of look at the results and say, well, they're good, they're bad, they're paid this, because that's the way we kind of consider it. But when you do get a sense of the personality, I think, like when you sit down and talk to a player, you don't expect them to say, well, we're going to play with a sweeper at the weekend. But I think sometimes people have very interesting stories to tell.
They definitely do. But I think, especially in the GAA, like we do like humility, and we like humility in Ireland as well. And I think it's a brave person that pushes back against that. In this country in general, and even with GAA and everything, we're getting more professional and all this sort of stuff, but we don't, on one hand we like it, but on the other hand, well, we're not too professional, so it's this
no notions,
and no feet on the ground around here, so it's valuable, but it'll take a while before we really embrace doors open.
I thought one of the really good ones the last few years was the Blues Sisters one with the Dublin.
Yeah, that was great.
Nicole Owens was very good about her own battles with mental health, and Sinead Finnegan talking about how her father dying affected her intercounty career, and that's what I mean. After that, you were all in on them.
Absolutely. We'll take a short break. We'll pick it up on the far side. So Conor McKeon, Clíodhna O'Connor staying with us. We're chatting through the Sunday papers. Back in one moment.
The Sunday papers on Off the Ball.
Warm up to big savings with the Woodies Home Event, where we've got everything you need to spruce up your home for less. Like 50% off our home furniture range. Buy one, get one half price on Dulux standard coloured emulsion. And 4 for 3 on all laminate flooring and tiles. Offers for a limited time only, so start planning your next project today. Shop the way that suits you, in store, online, or with click and collect. Woodies, we're all homemakers. T's and C's and exclusions apply.
At Volkswagen Commercial Vehicles, the wait is over. Production is back. Now your plans can begin. Scale your business, smarten your service offering. With HP Finance from 3.9%, purchase contributions of up to €3,000 and service plans from $12.99 per month. Don't wait. Secure your next Caddy Cargo, Transporter 6.1 or Crafter at your local Volkswagen Commercial Vehicles dealer. Be ready to really deliver. Offers for business customers only. Finance provided by way of hire purchase agreement from Volkswagen Financial Services Ireland, subject to lending criteria. Terms and conditions apply. Volkswagen Financial Services Ireland Limited is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland. Visit volkswagenvans.ie for further information.
This week at Super Value, we've got amazing better than half price offers to help you save, like Kellogg's Rice Krispies 700 gram, Robinson's Fruit Shoot 4-pack, and Chateau Sisson Grand Reserve. And don't forget, with Super Value's unbeatable own brand range, along with money off vouchers every week, Super Value makes saving money as easy as
1, 2, 3, go!
Enjoy alcohol responsibly.
Celebrate European Week of Sport this September at the Be Active Festival. An action-packed day out for the whole family at Sport Ireland Campus, Blanchardstown. Come and try new sports, fitness challenges and skill tests at Ireland's biggest sporting festival. Meet sporting legends. Check out the Inflatable Zone, Village Food Market and much more. There's something for everyone at the Be Active Festival. Saturday, September 24th at Sport Ireland Campus, Blanchardstown. Book your tickets now at beactivefestival.ie. It
was 3 amazing days of everything you ever imagined and more. Thank you to everyone who made Electric Picnic what it is. Looking forward to seeing you next year. 2023 tickets on sale now. For details, see electricpicnic.ie.
Barnardo's have been working with children and families in Ireland for 60 years. We are looking to recruit people to work in our children's services teams in various locations nationwide. If you are passionate about transforming the lives of vulnerable children, we want to hear from you. Go to barnardos.ie/careers to find out how you can become part of a team that put children at the heart of everything they do. Barnardo's, because childhood lasts a lifetime.
Do you need to move your business account? Then it's important to plan early. First, choose a provider and arrange to set up a new account. Then update suppliers and customers with your new account details to avoid any interruption to incoming or outgoing payments. If you have existing credit cards or overdrafts, your new provider will need to advise you on how to apply for these facilities with them. For more advice on what to take into account when moving account, visit movingaccount.ie. Brought to you by Banking and Payments Federation Ireland.
What makes a proper day out? Getting dressed up? Yeah. Having the absolute crack with your mates? Mm-hmm. Great food and a brilliant atmosphere? Definitely. What about a serious adrenaline rush? Go on, go on, go on! Sorry. Horse racing has all of this and more. It's a proper day out. Listowel Harvest Festival takes place from the 18th to 24th of September. Get on it at hri.ie. Horse Racing Ireland, for every racing moment.
On 106 to 108 FM, on the News Talk app, powered by Go Loud, and smart speakers. This is News Talk.
€7 billion has been earmarked, along with an additional cost of living package. There's widespread speculation that households are to get €600 in energy credits over 6 months. But with just over 2 weeks to go to Budget 23, Deputy Jack Chambers was refusing to deliver specifics.
There will be a pandemic scale response that's agile, that provides a really exceptional intervention for families and businesses. In extraordinary times, we have to have an intervention from the state, and that's why when you look at the overall budgetary context, if you look at pre-COVID, a budget of 2 or 3 billion was a significant intervention by the state in a budgetary context.
Labour is urging the government to think more strategically about targeting energy crisis reliefs to those who need them most. Party leader Ivana Bacik says any help is welcome, but energy credit payments don't go far enough in the battle to keep people warm this winter. She says other measures would go further to help families and households.
An expansion of the fuel allowance to bring in more households into the eligibility criteria, that would be a targeted measure, and it would, we think, have a greater impact on those families really struggling. We've also called, of course, for a price freeze, a cap on prices, and indeed for a windfall tax on excessive profits from energy companies. And though we're conscious that those are measures in particular that the EU are also looking at introducing.
And lastly, Aer Lingus says its operations are running mostly on time today, but 4 flights have been cancelled. Those include 2 trips between Dublin and Lanzarote and 2 between Dublin and Newark. It's after an IT glitch with an external service provider caused chaos yesterday, forcing the carrier to axe 51 flights. Ryan is making a second attempt at trying to fly to Canada today.
It was, to be honest, kind of a disgrace what they did to everyone. All they did was stand just outside the doors there, and we were standing around the back of the terminal for 2 hours and no one came down to tell us that flights were cancelled or anything like that.
That's it from me. More in an hour.
News Talk weather.
Thanks to Ryanair. See your Premier League team this year with daily flights to Liverpool, Manchester and London.
Thundery downpours are possible along with the potential for localised flooding, especially in the south and southwest. Top temperatures of 15 to 21 degrees. And now you're up to date on News Talk.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
Now then, you're welcome back. We're going through the Sunday Papers. Clíodhna O'Connor and Conor McKeon are here in studio. We were just finishing up on all that golf chat and Drive to Survive and the golf documentary series, and you mentioned Joe Brawley effusive on the Magic Johnson documentary, which is on Apple TV. You were saying there during the news, thumbs up, really good.
I watched the first episode of it last night. I thought it was excellent.
Yeah.
But again, like, I don't think you need a whole lot to make those documentaries very watchable, because like, at their core, they're all built around glitz and glamour anyway.
Yeah.
And Magic Johnson was obviously, I mean, somebody says at the start of it that still he is the biggest athlete or the most respected or loved athlete in Los Angeles, which is fair going considering they went through the Shaq and Kobe, and even LeBron is there now. So that kind of shows what a monumental and even Michael Jordan in the documentary makes the point that people say that Michael Jordan was the guy who turned the NBA into a kind of a global thing. But he says, but Magic had started that already.
Right. Wasn't it amazing in The Last Dance how much video footage there just was of Jordan? It's just a camera around him at all times.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Hanging out in the locker room before a game.
Yeah, you'd wonder for everyone else around those superstars within team sport, if there's a camera on you the entire time and I'm sitting beside you, like but I guess they just he's the one that is winning games and is doing what he needs to do on the court. Therefore, do you know what? You can have 10 cameras on you. And you just keep playing the way you're playing.
It's funny though, for, I don't want to say our generation, but like, it's funny for people who didn't have, like, who came from a generation where every sport isn't televised all the time. The things that kind of are still dear to you. Like, there will always be a special place in my heart for Italian football, purely because James Richardson on a Saturday morning and Gazzetta Football Italia. Yeah. Whereas when I try to explain that to younger people now, they're like, well, of course Italian football is on the television. Every football is on the television. You just have to kind of go and watch it.
I was just thinking what you were saying there about how if you were to think of a hurling team from the last 30 years, you'd think of Loughnane and Daly and these guys. And there's probably never been more of a need for these behind-the-scenes documentary, because if you think of Loughnane, the first interview I think of is, we're going to do it. Half-time in Northern final, out of his mind, sweat pouring off him, we're going to do it.
Yeah.
Whereas now everything is so homogenized and controlled, and it's a Jim Gavin press conference at 8 a.m. Actually, the media don't really get to know the personalities of the characters anymore. So there's now a real need to go behind the scenes and get some smidgen of personality and reality, because everything is so controlled with the media now.
Yeah, I think we just don't know how to do it yet. We're kind of afraid of it, because we're not really that adept of, someone is a little bit more open and a little bit more emotional and, oh my God, it's great, and then they're like, oh God, then they're looking back at it and saying, did I say anything wrong? Or everyone's incredibly self-conscious. So you'd be hoping that people will find a rhythm where they could speak a little bit more relaxed and openly and not be so cagey, because a lot of it doesn't, like, that is an iconic we're going to do it moment, and it didn't, like, that didn't really, there was no negative side to that. That was just somebody in the moment, in their sports environment, having huge confidence and going for it. And it was, sure, it's a lovely thing, and there's no danger in sharing a bit of that every now and then.
So let's move on then. Graham Potter features across the papers, as you might imagine. Page 4 of the Sunday Times, Jonathan Northcroft is about the best piece I think we picked out on Graham Potter and taking over at Chelsea. And I suppose the point he's trying to make, Jonathan Northcroft, that is, Clíodhna, is that there has been a change of emphasis at Chelsea, because it would be very easy to look at the sacking of Thomas Tuchel and say, wow, they're just continuing in the vein of Abramovich, which is to be ruthless when it comes to sacking managers. But it seems what Todd Bowley and co are trying to put in place is more of a holistic atmosphere and environment at the club. So, for instance, Todd Bowley, the new man in charge at Chelsea, is talking about Potter, and he's saying he has all the IQ, but he also has the EQ. And this is him talking about Potter's emotional intelligence. And the piece starts with how, when he was a coach in Sweden, that Potter worked with somebody called Brad Norrie, a player who had very troubled background, and Potter really worked with the person and got great things out of him on the pitch. And there's a point here where Northcroft says English clubs are increasingly going for the embodiment of a soft, soulful, new management style. And this is exactly the shift that Todd Bowley want. And Thomas Tuchel is more of the old school approach. And interestingly, actually, a story is told about Todd Bowley boarding the team bus after Chelsea lost 4-0 to Arsenal on tour to offer reassuring words to the players. Tuchel was scoffing at the speech when Bowley left the bus. Potter is holistic and relaxed about others having a say. The biggest takeaway from my interview with him, Northcroft interviewed Potter a couple of months ago. It was a really good interview. The biggest takeaway from my interview with him was that I had rarely met a manager with less ego. And he says typical is his decision to retain Anthony Barry, rising coach, who we obviously know here. But it would be tempting, Northcroft says, for a coach to come in and sweep the board. But Potter sees Barry as an asset. He's spoken to the Belgian manager, Roberto Martinez, to get a picture of his abilities. The question is, will Bowley's group stick with the culture shift if Potter and his slow burn ways take longer than big clubs are normally comfortable with to deliver success? Part of their reasoning after ditching Tuchel was that after his 100 days, they noticed that the first 50 days were way better than the second 50 days. Very black and white stuff. But they've told Potter that even if he doesn't make Champions League football this year, he's not going to get the sack. So that's all in Northcroft's piece. So again, at a glance, you would think, wow, Todd Bowley, as ruthless as Abramovich, there's going to be new managers every 6 months at Chelsea. But actually, in Potter, they're trying to go in for something akin to a 5-year project and beyond. Now, we could be reading this out in 6 months' time when Chelsea tank and Potter gets the bullet. Who knows?
This is interesting. So all this stuff about holistic coaching, it is everywhere in coach education, coach development now at the minute. I was at something in Sport Ireland last week. It was all about how to look after the person. It was about trauma in sport and trauma-informed environments and how you as coaches basically look after people. And someone at that made a very good point, and they were saying, like, if our world is about high performance, how can you possibly expect somebody to be performing at their best if at a personal level we're not minding them, or they're not in their optimum space? And we can throw all the technical, tactical, sports science stuff at them we want, but if that piece fundamentally isn't right, they'll never ever get to what their highest performance could be. So it is absolutely out there in coach education at the minute, and coach development and everything about it. However, it always comes back to the same thing. You thought maybe in 6 months' time Potter will be gone, because when you're in those situations, you have to be. There are times when you're making decisions between what is the immediate thing, the immediate match at the weekend, the immediate championship, versus what I know is better long term, and how much time am I willing to wait? Because Potter's style is all about relationships. It's all about trust. You don't do that in 50 days. So then it's the decision makers. Are they actually true to their word? Are they really meaningful, or when will their patience run out? And if a player is difficult, but Potter is saying, no, I think we can. This will get somewhere eventually. Are they going to believe him? Are they not? So everybody's talking about it, but some people have more patience for it than others, because it's not an easy way nor a quick way, you know.
And at these coaching conferences, so holistic coaching has become the buzzword in the industry over the last couple of years. Yeah,
athlete-centred, holistic coaching, providing the right environment, because like some of the sports science stuff, I shouldn't be so flippant about it, but of course there's a science to it, but it's sciencey, you know. You run X, you do this, your aerobic system will improve, and it's science based. But the managing relationships and making sure someone feels comfortable and trusts the team and trusts the player, that they can go out and give of themselves the best version of themselves. That's a whole other piece, and you can't write A plus B equals C for that when you're dealing with the human personality of it.
And do you buy into it? Because I suspect there would be definitely an old school quotient that would be just rolling their eyes at this kind of talk.
I do buy into it, yeah, and I've seen it work both as a from a player's point of view and from a coaching point of view. It does take time, and like from a coach's point of view, and that coach-athlete relationship, there is no one size fits all, and you do have a responsibility as a coach to figure out what is going to make this person give their best on the pitch, on the track, wherever it is, on the golf course. Because if your job is in high performance, that's your job, to support them to play at their best. And what's right for Joe isn't right for Conor. Do you know? And that's your job as a coach.
That is so time demanding on a coach. Like I talked to a couple of the Limerick hurlers even the last couple of months, and how often would John Kiley talk to you? Like a lot of them have said, well, there's so many of us, not that often. Now Caroline Currad's there and they go to her, and that's John Kiley delegating that aspect of coaching. But I mean, to try and build individual relationships with so many players is a huge ask of management, I would think. I remember Paul McGrath talking about Graham Taylor would bring him into his office routinely and just chat to him and really get to know him. And you know, Paul McGrath, obviously an extraordinary player and a person who probably needed attention and care, but I don't think Graham Taylor could do that for every one of the Aston Villa team. That must be the nightmare scenario for a coach, where you're trying to decide, who do I need to get stuck into here and who can I just let them self-manage?
Yeah. I had a conversation with a hurling coach maybe about 2 years ago, and we were kind of talking about that exact thing.
Right.
And we both made the point as the kind of the self-sufficient players or the low-maintenance players, we're both saying they're actually easy to forget, because you realise he's playing really well and he's ticking along and he's a great trainer and this, that and the other, and I haven't made the effort with him. I keep going after these problematic guys or whatever, the person who's coming back from injury, whereas this guy who's doing well, how am I making sure I'm not checking in with him? I'm fighting fires, or what's the immediate thing? So that's the important of a support team, isn't it? That there's more than one person, and there's more than one person to build relationships, because you can have stronger and weaker relationships with people. It's the nature of it, you know.
Because far back as 10 years ago, Jem Gavin was citing Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, that study where, you know, people will fulfill their potential in things that they might consider hobbies if the various building blocks of the rest of their life were stable and secure. So he always emphasised the need for players to be on top of their college work or in stable working environments, and to have their own personal relationships in good working order. And when those things happened, like it is proven, you know, through studies, that players will focus more, to be in a better frame of mind, to be more positive, and to have more time to take ownership of the thing themselves. Because ultimately, I think the nature of modern coaching, certainly coaching over the last 10 years, is less prescribed and more about empowering players to kind of do it themselves on the pitch and to figure things out. And this does seem to be something that Graham Potter has a very strong understanding of, going by the various anecdotes that are in the pieces about him today, that he understands that a player is a human, and like a human's ability to do anything to a high level will depend on their peace of mind, their levels of happiness, their levels of comfort in their surroundings, and all of those various different things. And I think most people who haven't been involved in like an elite sporting team over the last 10 years or 20 years would be surprised at how prevalent this kind of methodology is used in coaching. Because anybody that I ever come across, that this is the way the players kind of function now.
Is it? And what would be said, Clíodhna, within coaching conferences, for instance, about the Ferguson approach, where fear and threat is a big part of his methodology?
I think people would agree, or there would be an appreciation that sometimes there are times when you have to be a little bit more direct, and sometimes a well-timed, maybe not throwing something at somebody, but a well-timed kind of hairdryer treatment-esque thing can actually have an impact. And if I'm a player on a team and it's half-time and we're not particularly performing, and you go into a dressing room and maybe you feel like, as a coach, or maybe you feel like, someone needs to light a rocket under us, and we're okay, and we're all able to take that because the general environment is good, you know. So at times there is a time where it is absolutely appropriate for a coach to say, listen, this isn't good enough, or this falls below our standards or our expectations. That's fine if the bedrock is ultimately one of trust and good quality relationships.
Yes.
I think motivating people by fear or that really aggressive tactic can be, sometimes it works in the short term, or works for some players, but I think generally it can run out of steam, or because there's only one way. So you're motivating an entire group just by fear.
Well, and also it's very easy to caricature Ferguson's methodology. I mean,
yes,
he was
true.
not just a ranter and a raver, as all the players would talk about. He would sit with them one-on-one. He would know about their personal problems. He would know the names of all their families. He would be very invested in them as people. Heard Gary Neville just talking recently that Ferguson's team talks would often bring in the players' grandparents, and that would always get to Neville because he had a very close relationship with his grandparents. So this wasn't just you get out there and effing win, or you're out of this club. It was far more nuanced than.
But even in the context of Potter, which I think a lot of people would be very interested to see how he does, just because of the kind of classification or specification of manager he is, and the kind of the culture or the practices at Chelsea over the years. So he's been brought in to kind of establish a culture, which is a very broad term that a lot of people use without really understanding. But I think the point of it is, like, they've highlighted the number of managers that the big six in England have gone through since 2013. So Arsenal have had 3 and Chelsea have had 14. So if you've had 14 managers in 19 years, like, the idea of establishing a culture, like, that's clearly not the club's policy under the previous owners, because you just would not have a time. And sometimes you get the feeling when a Premier League team appoints a manager, they're bringing them in to knock a tune out of what's there already.
But that's been grossly successful for Chelsea.
Yeah, but if
they've won 2 Champions Leagues, they've won league titles, they've Arsenal with their 3 managers, they've destroyed them. So maybe longevity's overrated.
But think of the money that Chelsea have sunk into all of that, because every year they're buying the most expensive shiny toys for them. Look at Klopp, look at Guardiola. Their first seasons with Liverpool and Manchester City were by no means spectacular, and that was the time that they were undergoing the same kind of culture change within the club that would ultimately lead to the success that they have brought to their clubs. Whereas with Chelsea, going by those figures, they never would have been given the opportunity. They would have been cut adrift before they ever got to that point.
No, that's true. And the piece mentions Todd Bowley. Obviously, he's involved with the Dodgers in LA as well, and they've had Dave Roberts as their baseball manager since 2016, and they've reached 3 World Series under his direction. So, like, there's real stability in a culture with the LA Dodgers. I do love that story, by the way, of Todd Bowley getting on the bus and saying, guys, don't worry about it, and then Tuchel scoffing at it after he leaves. You can see why that marriage was not going to last very long.
Even watching that All or Nothing documentary as well.
It made a big impression on you.
It did. But it was very interesting about the story of Arsenal selling Pierre Aubameyang, because effectively they paid him to go away.
Yeah.
And he was the top scorer at the club. He was the 1 goal scorer. And at a time when Arsenal were finding goals hard to come by. But it was very clear from watching the documentary that the point of getting rid of Aubameyang was what Arteta was trying to establish in terms of the behaviours of the players that came automatically. He was having the exact opposite impact on it. So outwardly you sit there and say, well, they're finding it hard to score goals, and they've just paid a guy who does that by reflex to leave to go to another European club. But actually, when you got into it and you saw that the effect that it had, you were taking out the biggest guy who was maybe symptomatic of old habits that you're trying to get rid of. And I think that comes back down to the idea of what Potter is trying to achieve.
Well, he'd be thrilled with his new signing up front, Aubameyang. It's just what he needs. We've just signed this guy, you need to make it work. So interesting times.
Pay him to go to Barcelona.
Yeah, quite a few pieces talking about Vera Pauw's reign as well. Back page, Eamon Sweeney's drawn the parallels with Jack Charlton and Vera Pauw, and foreign coach and low ebb and coming in and making a big difference. And he says Pauw can complete the analogy by emulating Charlton's feat of 33 years ago. So 1989, Charlton brought Ireland to a first World Cup when they beat Malta. It was 3 years and 6 months since his first game in charge. Pauw will have been in charge for 3 years and 1 month when Ireland play Austria or Scotland on October the 11th. So she's getting lots of plaudits across the papers.
She is, yeah, and deservedly so. And we're talking about Graham Potter and giving time. Remember when Vera Pauw started, and they were 11 games, defeat after defeat after defeat. And I love the way she talks about that period of time where, yes, we were playing better opposition, but we had to set the bar higher. We had to have faith in what we were trying to do. And you would hope that they're at a tipping point now where that should and could all pay off. And if you listen to any players talk about her in terms of those building relationships and trust. That seems to be there in spades within that team, and maybe that's the platform that's allowing them to have a little bit more belief to push forward the close games that they would lose. They're now winning them, so I think she is shifting the needle. And I know the qualification route is complicated, but you would hope that they were in a position that they could pull off something significant for the group.
The sense seems to be that it'll most likely be Austria who'll beat Scotland. They'll have to go away to Austria, who reached the Euro quarterfinals in the summer. That will be difficult, but then the expectation is that when they go to this bizarrely complicated tournament in the new year, they will be amongst the strongest teams there, so they have a really good chance of making a World Cup via that route. So it all remains to be seen. But Vera Pauw getting a lot of really positive press coverage across the papers today. The URC not getting much positive press coverage. So the URC starts again on Friday. The rugby season is back with a bang. And we have Brendan Fanning, Neil Francis, Peter O'Reilly across various pages talking about the press conference which was held during the week. The URC chief executive was launching the league, but also talking about the decision to partner up with Qatar Airways. And I mean, so Brendan Fanning, first of all, the headline sums up his point: cash the check, just spare us your values. So I think his point is, fair enough, everyone's doing this, you're now doing this. So the byline is, forget the notions of rugby's moral high ground in the wake of Qatar deal. And he's saying, if you're taking the cash, then just spare us all the press release talk about legacy and values and integrity. Just be honest about the whole situation. And he kind of eviscerates Martin Anoa'i, the chief executive of the URC. Peter O'Reilly in the Sunday Times is very similar as well. He just had a smaller piece than Brendan Fanning on page 6. And again, it was a very similar theme. He said, Qatar links and World Cup plans spoil URC build-up. He says, it might have been preferable if Martin Anoa'i, the URC's chief executive, had admitted that they were merely following the lead of other sports in putting commerce out of ethics, or indeed following the lead of World Rugby, who have an ongoing partnership with Emirates, another airline owned by a state whose government has continued to commit human rights violations. Instead, Anoa'i spoke of bringing rugby's values to Qatar. I mean, of all the things to try and say. He spoke of bringing rugby's values to Qatar, which sounded suspiciously like the old justification used by teams that toured South Africa during the apartheid regime, and we know how that worked out. Neil Francis is also writing about it. France is a slightly different tack. He's kind of like, on the human rights issue, he's kind of saying, well, spare us the hypocrisy if we look at countries all around the world.
Yeah, and like in a way, I kind of agree with Neil Francis to a degree, because, okay, the Premier League didn't go ahead today, but if, like, a lot of people will be watching the Premier League today in stadiums named after these same airlines, and, jerseys that have sponsors that are gambling companies. And regardless of what sport you go into, and Malachi Clarkin did a very good piece recently about the sponsorship, banking sponsorship in Gaelic games as well.
Yeah.
There's a reason that sports washing is effectively another name for sponsorship, and part of the reason that companies and different organisations will sponsor sport is because it's a very wholesome brand to be associated with. And if you want your brand to be associated with something wholesome, you're trying to deliver a message. And the Qatar stuff and the Saudi stuff, it's very, I think to us in this part of the world, it strikes us as being very there's something a little bit too blunt about it, because it seems to be coming from a very unashamed place. Like the money that they throw at the golf, for instance, is so big that it's very clear that they're not trying to build a product. They're not trying to recoup their investment. But by the same token, like, sport is taking money from all sorts of shady kind of corners of the world. And if you want to go back even further and talk about people who are trying to, carefully manicure their image by associating with sport, like, watch the Super Bowl and watch the display of American military regalia that starts off at the very beginning of that. There's a reason why they do that sort of show before a Super Bowl, and it's to kind of glorify the American military. So I suppose the point that a lot of people make here is that there's money coming in from all sorts of places. Why is it that when it becomes Qatari thing or a Saudi thing. We are drawing the line here.
He says if we were really worried about human rights abuses and states that subjugate and oppress their citizens, then World Rugby would have to expel over half of its affiliated members. Take a look at the list. There are continuous flagrant abuses of human rights here and in the Western world, so no, I've no issue with Qatar or Qatar Airways or any other Middle Eastern airlines who want to throw a few quid at this strange game.
Yeah, and that's fair enough to an extent, but I think it's slightly different when there are corporations who are trying to use sponsorship, because you know what they're trying to do. They're trying to make themselves more profitable as organisations. But I think when it's states, and I think this is maybe the reason the Newcastle, the Man City stuff, the LIV stuff, and now the rugby stuff kind of sticks in the crop, because it's very clear that what's happening here is actual nations themselves and their regimes are trying to attach themselves and trying to kind of, well, launder their image to the rest of the world. So it's almost more deliberate than profiteering, which kind of makes it seem even murkier.
There is one point where he says that many point to the murder of Jamal Khashoggi in Istanbul as a reason why our pure as the driven snow democracies should have nothing to do with these heinous states. And he says, wondering which state can cast the first stone. And he says, in this island, Veronica Gear and Martin O'Hagan were murdered before the turn of the century. Only very recently, Lyra McKee had her life ended, dispatched by new IRA active service members. It says in the UK, 8 journalists killed, 23 in the States. Does it matter whether it's state-sponsored or not? I would say in that instance, of course it does.
Yeah, I think that's one of the stranger paragraphs kind of to print this morning.
It does matter.
Because neither the new IRA, as he puts it here, or the people who murdered Veronica Kieran or Martin O'Hagan were pumping money into sport to try and make their actions seem palatable to the rest of the world. So.
That point was odd, I thought, but on the point about like which democracy or which country wants to throw the first stone, I do accept it to a large point. Now, there's something just so obviously egregious about, for instance, the way Qatar have behaved towards migrant workers at the building of World Cup stadiums, their LGBTQ plus attitudes. They are just very out of kilter with how most of us, I think, see the world. And you are sponsoring a tournament in this part of the world as well. And, you know, I saw Rory O'Connor make the point during the week that the URC were very quick in all that kind of corporate-y way to kind of reach out to the Leinster player who came out as gay not so long ago and put an arm around and say, we're so thrilled for you. But on the other hand, let's be under no illusion. Economics rule here, and they'll take the money and pass on the ethics. So anytime you see those tweets in the future, should future rugby players come out as gay and the URC rush to put their arm around them, there's a reality here as well, Clíodhna.
Massively. And it's all this stuff around how we perceive sport, and it's even an individual player as such a role model. At the end of the day, they're just a person who's good at a particular sport, or this the purest notion of sport, that it's that wholesome thing and very pure activity. But at the end of the day, like, it's a massive commercial global entity. It's huge. Yeah. And these sort of negotiations and compromises and ethical things, I mean, they're going on in every single walk of life. Yeah. And now it happens in sport and we're like, oh my God, this is horrific because it goes against our values. And maybe it is there's something different. Your point about when it's states or nations versus corporate companies. But at the end of the day, how do you draw the line now that the URC is what it is, a global competition? Yeah. Where is the point that you say, no, we want to keep these really traditional values of rugby, but we've got to make this work on a global scale? Like those two, I'm not sure those two things can coexist. Where what you outlined, Joe, like all the very, and kind of unashamedly, no, this is how we do things over here, and these people, we're not going to give them any rights, and that's just the way we do, but we're happy to give you the money. Like it's a rock and a hard place. I don't see how those things can coexist. You either say, right, well, international sport has changed and it doesn't have the same values at its bedrock as previous, you know.
I think part of it too is, you know, the URC, not to make excuses for them, but I think a lot of people who are involved in sport that will have offers on the table from these kind of sources will now point to the burst dam that's in front of them and say, sorry, you know, Manchester City, one of the biggest clubs in Europe, the World Cup is in Qatar this December.
Yeah.
You know, they've taken this biggest competition in all of it. Like there's talk of Saudi Arabia bidding for the next tournament. I would imagine an Olympic bid isn't too far away either. So, you know, somebody like the URC, maybe in the scale of all of this, might look at themselves as being a small bit insignificant. And that's part of the problem now, because it has been... This practice of taking money, I think the World Cup was the big one.
Well, we're at the point of critical mass now.
Yeah.
This won't be mentioned again about the URC. This is like a week out from the tournament starting. This is definitely, you know, fresh on the heels of the press conference during the week and the announcement. That's it now. Because people are just increasingly immune to it, and I don't think anybody's that outraged, I suspect. You know, it's it suits for the columns this week, and then it's done, I would think. Neil France does make a very good point, though, about like the URC and the league itself, and I totally agree with him on this, where he's basically talking about like how, you know, he refers to annualised bluster about how, you know, potentially Munster-Leinster matches might be on in Chicago. And he was saying most regular season derbies between Leinster and Munster are populated now by AIL players. The big one is anything but you try and promote it in the US with anything except frontliners on both sides and you'll get the gate. And he said if NUI was keen to improve his league, he would try and coordinate the fixtures with Andy Farrell so you could maximise the game's potential. If Johnny Sexton plays only 6 URC matches a season, make sure that 2 of them are the Munster game. There have been more duds than doozies, and the patience and understanding of the dyed-in-the-wool Irish fan is wearing thin. Don't promise or even hint if you can't deliver. And I think that's a fair point about the league as well. So, yeah, URC under fire, I would say, across the papers, but I just don't see it becoming an ongoing stick that they'll
No,
be
people forget about
with.
it next week. That's the reality.
Yeah, I would think so. Colin O'Rourke, you mentioned earlier on, Clíodhna is writing about the All-Stars and basically says what everybody reckons: if David Clifford doesn't get Footballer of the Year, it's going to be the shock of all shocks.
Yeah, I can't see any other option coming there.
How many Footballer of the Year awards is David Clifford going to win?
Potentially more than one, I'd say.
I would think
I
so.
don't know.
Do you have to give it to an All-Ireland winning player? Who's the last non-All-Ireland winning player to get Footballer of the Year? Andy Moran. 2017.
Oh, very good, yeah.
Yeah.
So what happens sometimes, so for people who might know, the All-Star Selection Committee consists of journalists.
Are you on it?
No. So in the interest of full disclosure, they will pick the 3-person shortlist.
Why do you feel you haven't been invited?
So they'll pick the 3-person shortlist. After that, it goes to a vote of players. So there have been a couple of occasions, and I think when Andy Moran won it, now not that he wasn't a worthy winner, but there were 2 Dublin players nominated that year, and Dublin had won the All-Ireland. And sometimes what happens is the Dublin vote will get split between the 2 candidates, and then the third candidate. Now, this year, it would seem like it's the opposite, that if there was any doubt, and there is none, that David Clifford is going to get the votes. The other 2 players that are nominated are both Galway players. So even if there is a kind of an anti-Kerry vote, if something like that existed among players, it would be split between the 2 Galway players.
It was McDade and Shane Walsh.
Yeah. But I think with Clifford, there's something so sort of universally appreciated about the way he plays football that I think he will just be a very popular footballer of the year, even amongst opposition players.
It's hard to think of a player so universally lauded now as, you know, being talked about as the greatest ever.
Yeah.
At his age.
Yeah.
It's nuts. And like not by very like sober, astute judges who aren't rushing to give plaudits generally, but they are saying this guy could be the best ever.
Yeah.
And we're watching it unfold.
Yeah, and and that's exciting, isn't it? Seeing someone who seems to be so comfortable in it in so many ways. You've definitely seen cases before, maybe not to this level, but where a young player comes through or younger, and all this talk, and you can see it, they're not really comfortable. He seems to nearly thrive on it. You know, he wants the ball. In all those pressure situations, he doesn't care if there's 3, 4, 5 players around him. It's give me the ball, and and he also seems to be very humble as well, and sure is not perfect. That's exactly what we want.
Don't do any documentaries.
Yeah. As long as he doesn't do a documentary, he's
keep the head down.
Jack O'Connor gave an interview after the final speaking about him, and wherever they met up on the morning of the All-Ireland final, he said he had a quick chat with him getting on the bus, and Clifford was standing there drinking a coffee, and he said like he hadn't a care in the world. So I think his personality lends itself to being the go-to guy in pressure situations because it doesn't weigh heavily on his shoulders. The only person I can ever remember really having this kind of level of whatever excitement or anticipation about was Joe Canning, you know, because Canning was asked into the Galway senior squad as a minor by Ger Loughnane. By the time he came into the senior squad, he'd already won 3 All-Ireland minor titles and was it 212 that he scored that day against Cork? It was just a phenomenal start. And every time you were going to see, anytime you got your weekend markings and you're going to Galway versus whatever, you were generally going, this is going to be brilliant, I'm going to go and see Canning.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with Clifford, because he can do things, like we've seen outstanding players who've been the best player in the country, but they've been some modified version of a player who came before them, had the same skill set or played the game in the same way. Well, I've never seen anybody do things that Clifford does.
I was in Kerry during the week and I was driving by Fossa GAA Club. And it is a wonderful thing, obviously, but it just seems so incongruous that, like, Clifford's playing a lot of his games in there.
Yeah.
Beautiful club and lovely clubhouse, but I was like, that's the pitch where Clifford plays.
Yeah. But you would hope over the next couple of years that he keeps that ease and sense of self that he seems to have as hopefully his career continues, and you would think that this Kerry team is getting. You can't see any major changes happening over the next year or two.
No, the only thing about it is looking at it like a team that's on top looks like it's always going to be on top until it's not. You know, like a few years ago, it would have been impossible to envisage a season when Brian Fenton didn't finish with an All-Star, and now he's gone through 2. You know, so it does occasionally happen. But I think when Clifford gets his All-Star this year, I think he'll be the youngest footballer ever to have 4 All-Stars to his name. I think Tommy Walsh might have been younger in hurling.
Is this his 4th All-Star?
4th All-Star in his 5th season playing football for Kerry.
Because O'Rourke does ask, where do you rank an All-Star? Below an All-Ireland. There's only one All-Star winner in the room here. So let's see. You can tell us, where should an All-Star rank? Below an All-Ireland, he says definitely. Below a county championship medal with your club, he says certainly. Below a National League medal with your county, of course. Below a provincial championship with your county, naturally. Below a league medal with your club, he says without a shadow of a doubt. Where do you have your All-Star? Top.
Yeah. Top, it's all about me. Yeah, absolutely. But that's the thing, isn't it? But that is the narrative in GA that
what's the truth? Where do you have your All-Star? Really?
It's on my mother's windowsill. That's where it is. Good. Yeah. I think she appreciates it more than me.
Really, is it not a big thing for you?
It is a big thing. The longer,
because you texted me this morning and say, could you introduce me as All-Star winner?
Can I bring it? O'Connor. Can I take the coffee cup out and put the All-Star there? Yeah.
Would it be above a club county medal?
Oh, I don't think so.
No,
I don't think so,
All-Star.
because
best in your position in the entire country.
Yeah, but a club county medal, all the stuff around that, the crack around that is pretty good. I think the longer you are retired, as I am from football, the more you can appreciate it. But at the time, like I won one of them when I can't remember which defeat to Cork it was, but after that you'd give up 100 of them to win that one game against Cork.
How many do you have?
2.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Not 100. Yeah.
So there's a couple of other GA pieces. Clock is coming against us a touch. Michael Clifford in the Mail. I know this caught your eye, Conor. I suspect it's an area you're watching with interest and having to cover. He's written about the Donegal dilemma and just that slight delay in appointing a manager. A couple of top-level counties not appointing managers, and maybe part of the reason why. Dermot Crowe has a piece on various player revolts against managers down the years. It's kind of a typical feature piece that we're going to see in the second half of the year from GA writers. So I guess the point is county boards have to get these appointments right now. The stakes have never been higher. So who are the main counties we're looking at? Donegal for sure.
Donegal, Monaghan and Roscommon. So 3 of the 8 Division 1 counties next year don't have managers currently. Okay. Roscommon was slightly more recent when Anthony Cunningham stood down. But definitely the Donegal and Monaghan situations have gone on so long that it would indicate that they're, I don't know if struggling is the right word, but it hasn't been straightforward.
Or is it just that there's no rush? Like, we're only in September.
Well, there might be a touch of that too, but, you know, in the Monaghan situation, there has been plenty of people interviewed a long time ago.
Right.
And there's a couple of people who've kind of turned it down as well. So
it is people turning it down as well as
I think so. Like, it's, you know, it's such a big undertaking. The point that Micheál Clifford makes in his piece here is that Donegal, he says it here, the post should still engender interest from the brightest and best managers out there. And it should. You know, Donegal are a perennial Division 1 team. They have one of the most, you know, incredible players we've ever seen in Michael Murphy. They have a lot of good young players. They have a lot of the elements you'd need to go into having a successful team. But for some reason, they don't seem to be like Malachy O'Rourke was the person that a lot of people had pegged for that job, and the indications are that Donegal County Board would have loved Malachy O'Rourke to take the job, but he doesn't seem to be interested. And the talk now is about Martin McHugh. And Micheál makes the point, McHugh's low profile over recent weeks in local media, where he is a popular pundit, has invited speculation that he's trying to avoid asking the question which everyone is asking, which would make perfect sense. But I did a piece a couple of weeks ago about the difficulties that come with appointing a manager. And I spoke to a lot of people in different county boards who were either serving officers or former officers. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them spoke because now, a fair few spoke off the record on the condition of anonymity, and nearly every single one of them told you that it was the hardest part of the job, because the hoops that you have to jump through to find suitable candidates, to figure out if they were in it for the right reasons, to match whatever, because, you know, there's a huge financial element to it too, you know, whether it comes down to paying the manager, like the cost of a management team, you know, it has to be included, you know, the coaches and all the facilities that kind of go into it. And then getting it through the democracy, the internal democracy in each county. It's a massive thing, and I'm not surprised that we're in a situation where there's three teams that you would say would have strong chances of at least winning a provincial title next year, and will certainly compete in Division 1, that haven't put the final touches on their appointments yet.
And Clíodhna, listeners will know, I'm sure you were part of Matty Kenny's Dublin hurling setup. Would that have encouraged you to get involved again at intercounty level, or were the demands such that you think, wow, I really have to think about it again?
I guess I'm slightly different, that my career is coaching, so you're used to the demands in whatever sense it is. Like, I'm not a teacher, and I don't have another job during the day or whatever, which other people are in that scenario. But the demands are unbelievable for like, we talk about dual career players, dual career coaches. Yeah. So like Matty Kenny's an engineer, and a very good one and a successful one. You know, so there's so much to consider from a coach's, manager's point of view in terms of that undertaking. And now there's huge budgets behind it. There's huge expectations. You have to find, we might want you as the manager, but who's your backroom team, and do you have this and this? And no, then we don't want you, or you want to do something a little different. We don't have the budget or the facilities to do that. So it's hugely complicated, I think. And it's actually okay for me because it's my career.
So you're hired and paid to coach?
Yeah, so
even within intercounty level.
So I would be from the athlete development side in the GAA. So all the sports science, the physical side. Now, depending on the sport and depending on the rest of the backroom team, you can be sliding a little bit more into the sport specific stuff, be it football or hurling, to try and blend the two together. Okay. That would be how my role usually goes.
Okay.
But even just talking about the turnover of managers as well would suggest that it's a short-lived thing. So Colm Collins is now the longest-serving football manager, and he is basically a freak now. In the last 12 months, 24 of the 32 counties have changed their manager. So between either for the start of the season just finished or for the start of next season, there have been 24 of the 32 football counties have made a managerial appointment. And in hurling, of the 11 Lee McCarthy counties, 6 of them will have changed between the end of this season and the start of next year. Yeah. So like, that just kind of shows that it's it's not a long-term thing. No, people go in and give it a crack and throw everything at it, and the number of things that can go wrong from, you know, Dermot Crowe's piece today mentions situations where players are unhappy, and that's obviously a big problem in the GAA because the players in the county are the players in the county, or you just don't come up to expectations. Like Micheál makes the point here about Donegal, that they never really got over the 2020 Ulster final defeat to Cavan, and that has held them back over the last couple of years. And you know, maybe that's an issue. You know, you could look at the profile of a county and say, well, I'm not sure I'm going to, because there's no surer way for your stock to plummet than to go into a county and not have the desired effect.
Well, I suspect most managers now are sitting down with their families, if they have them, and sitting down with employers and saying, this is a 2-year, 3-year thing. Yeah. I'm going to give it hell for the 2-3 years, and then I'll come straight out of it and we can get back to normal life. But in the meantime, this is going to take precedence. And it's a bigger conversation than we have time for. But I would suspect that's why a lot of players, you know, go back to Graham Potter, and we're talking about holistic environments and everything. They're probably being managed by managers who deep down in their private thoughts are saying, I don't really care if this player is playing in 6 or 7 years' time. I need this player to play through these injuries now to get me to an All-Ireland so I can get out of here in 2 or 3 years. And I'm not sure it's a healthy balance, because you've managers in it for the short term and you've players maybe started their careers who would still like to be playing in 10 years being flogged.
Yeah, it's a challenging one, competing interests, and that's for sure. And imagine, you were talking about players high performing. So I'm a intercounty manager, and I run my own business, and I'm coming to training, and I'm trying to manage all these people and the stress of my own thing, of my own business, of my own job. It's hugely challenging for them, really, really.
Yeah, just need good expenses.
Yeah.
We're pretty much out of time. Savannah McCarthy has done a brilliant interview, by the way, with Carl Dennehy, and it starts off with her as the 6-year-old girl from Listowel growing up in the travelling community, and how she's now in her mid-20s and playing for Ireland. It's really, really good. It's pages 6 and 7 of the Sunday Independent. We had planned to get to it, but just clock is against us, but just wanted to give it a quick mention. We are out of time. Thanks so much to Clíodhna O'Connor. Thanks so much to Conor McKeon. The Sunday Paper Review available to podcast in all the usual places. Guys, thanks a million for coming in and giving up your Sunday. Appreciate it. We'll take a short break.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball. Alive and Kicking with Claire McKenna.
This week on the Alive and Kicking podcast.